Welcome to Mobile and Black and White, Dialogue to Action. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us to really have a wonderful discussion. We're so excited to have our panelists with us today. I'm Dr. Joelle Lewis Billingsley, Associate Professor at the University of South Alabama in the Instructional Design program. And I had the opportunity years ago to start work on a wonderful project that is still going and still relevant today. So that's part of why we're here. Our purpose in the Mobile and Black and White Dialogue to Action project is to provide an opportunity for individuals and groups to commit to participate in conversations that will lead to action. And that's why we're here today, and we're so grateful that you would join us and that our panel is here with us. I want to encourage you to put questions in. We have our moderators working hard to relay those questions. And so as we're going through the conversation, please post your comments and your questions. And as a reminder, when we do this work, we do like to move in civility. And so we're encouraging that and practicing and modeling that in these conversations. Also, I'd like to encourage everyone to register. We have a guide that accompanies these conversations, the video segments that will be released. And so we encourage you, look on our Facebook page. There's a way to register individually and in groups. So thank you again. I'd like to introduce our first panelist, County Commissioner, District 1, Merceria Ludgood. Elected by the people of Mobile, October 9, 2007. And I'll give you just a brief overview of the many accomplishments and accolades of Commissioner Ludgood. She's received her BS and master's degree from the University of Alabama. She also has obtained a law degree and divinity degree. And over her career of public service and service in the community, she has demonstrated commitment and servant leadership, a dedication to the citizens of Mobile. In her current role, her primary interests include economic development, emphasizing providing infrastructure for growth, accessible recreational opportunities in the county, and building bridges across diverse communities. She's dedicated and inclusive and just an exemplary leader in our community. So we welcome County Commissioner Merceria Ludgood. And my colleague, Dr. Robert Gray, will introduce our other panelists.
Hello, everyone. I'm so honored that we have Dr. Peggy McIntosh here with us today. She is from the Wellesley Centers for Women, and she's also the founder of the National Seed Project on Inclusive Curriculum. She also had a book that just came out from Routledge entitled On Privilege, Fraudulence, and Teaching as Learning. And I just have to say, I don't usually do very well when I go off script on introductions, but if it weren't for Peggy McIntosh, I wouldn't be sitting here today. Probably about 20 years ago, I was talking to my neighbor when I was in the doctoral program at Michigan State, and she started talking about a seminal piece of writing that that Peggy wrote, and I went and read it, and my head blew off, and I've kind of been dedicated to this ever since. And so thank you. We're so honored. Peggy is a giant in this area, and it's so wonderful that she's here, and it's so good to see her.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, now we get to actually hear from our panelists. They're going to give us some first thoughts, really thinking about, what they would like to share with us initially in this conversation. And if it's okay, County Commissioner, we will start with you.
So, first of all, I'd just like to say how honored I am to share, even remotely, a panel with Peggy McIntosh. She is a legend in her own time. And I just want to first thank you for the work that you've done, the groundbreaking work that I think that put a lot of people on a different path. And I'm just honored to be here with you. I've read it too. I was like Rob, it blew the top of my head off because I was not accustomed to hearing that from a white woman, to be perfectly honest. But this is an important topic. I think why we need to still be talking about race, and I think it's a timely topic. You know, there are a lot of people who are energized by what's happening in the country right now, but there are others who are just fatigued and disheartened because they feel like they have been fighting the same battle for 50 years or more. And we're still raising the same issues, still in the same forums. And until now, really getting the same result. You know, I was just thinking here in Mobile County, my first picket line for against police brutality was probably 1969 or something. I was still in high school. And so, but that's still a major issue that we're facing. And I will just tell you, like those people who are feeling disheartened, I've had some times where I really contemplated just walking away from racial dialogue. And it was just so tiring. It was just exhausting to be the one always out there trying to keep this moving. And, but, you know, it was typically what I call the converted. Those were the ones who were always there. And after a while, you know, it becomes an echo chamber. But I finally decided that as long as there were people out here who had an authentic, who wanted to engage authentically, who really wanted to look at where they are, where they were working, where they were doing, where they could use their influence to make things better. As long as there were people there who wanted to do it, then I couldn't give up. I couldn't throw in the towel. And so here we are today, still talking about race and still having to believe that that an essential part of change is the dialogue.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We really appreciate your first thoughts. Peggy McIntosh, would you give us your first thoughts as well?
I'm thinking back to Audre Lorde's statement. When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. Thank you, Audre Lorde, woman warrior, Black woman, lesbian woman, visionary, intellectual, who gave us her thoughts. Raised as a polite white girl in an upper class family in New Jersey, I was afraid of doing the wrong thing. I was inspired really by people like Audre Lorde and before her, James Baldwin, to look at my life in racial terms. And the film Black and White in Mobile is a brilliant collection of statements from people who've done the same. Rob Gray, I think he really freed people up to not lecture and not confess, but testify. I think the secret to this facing of race has to do with testifying rather than lecturing, testifying from one's own experience, not one's opinions. Opinions come from all over the place, from many, many sources. By the time they get inside you, they're kind of hybrids. But what has happened to each of us personally, starting from early childhood or starting from our ancestors' memories and perhaps written knowledge. What has happened to us individually is, I think, unplumbed territory for most people that I grew up with. Schools did not encourage us to know ourselves and our histories. Churches didn't either. And it's a great gift to have inspirational people give you back to yourself by testifying about themselves. I feel a very great fund of gratitude in myself for Rob, Joel, and the people who made the film, including you, Commissioner Ludgood. Thank you. As soon as you testified about not wanting to be the one Black person, or not being in institutions where there was a lot of singling out of a single person of color to show that there was no problem, I said, I really can work with this woman, although I didn't dream that there would be a chance to do that.
Thank you both for very powerful statements. And before we started the segment, Peggy was in the Zoom meeting, and we were talking, and she talked about how, asking when it was that I interviewed her. I remember I heard she was going to be at a conference in North Carolina, and I drove up there from Mobile just hoping she would talk to me. And that was, I think, 2011 or 2012. And the interview lasted for close to an hour, and then I think we talked for more than an hour about Emily Dickinson and poetry, and it was really nice. But one of the things she said was that this film was sort of things haven't changed that much. It's still very current because things are still kind of where they were then, and you can say that things have changed in some ways, and but stayed the same in many others. But one of the things that I think is still the same, but also more intense, is that there are two sides. And there's the simplified versions, the right and the left in the US, and they can't speak to each other, it seems, because as soon as one talks, the other one thinks they're stupid. It's not that they're wrong, or there's this crazy bipolar culture we have going on. And so how do we reach across that divide and find some middle ground and actually get people to hear each other and not just assume that the other side is wrong? And I would like both of you to answer that question. Maybe Merceria can go first, since Peggy had the mic last.
I reject the notion of the right and left. I think both right and left are the fringe. I think when you talk to people, that you will find that most people are already in the middle. There are some things on the so-called right with which I agree. There probably is more on the so-called left with which I agree. But I think it comes right down to the middle. And so I think part of it is deciding that the solution is more important than holding tight to your philosophical perspective, that you decide, okay, today, June 24th, I'm going to check my right, my left credentials, or whatever they are. I'm going to check them at the door. And I'm coming to the table looking for a solution. And if that means relinquishing some of what I thought was fundamental to my rightism or fundamental to my leftism, that I'm prepared to do that if it's going to move us forward. Because what you see with the polarization is paralysis. Nothing's happening. And people have got to get to a point where it's like, it's more important to me to be seen as a solution, working toward a solution, that it is being labeled a progressive.
Thank you. Peggy, would you like to weigh in?
I think that until you realize you're hurting, you may not want to change your angle of vision or the behavior of your life. I think that seeing that you're hurting is the likeliest way for people in the dominant group of whites who can put food on the table. It's so wonderful to stop being feared. It is wonderful to stop being mistrusted. It is wonderful to stop being accused. When you lend your weight and your trust to people, now this is where it gets very complicated. You agree to learn from those you were taught to look down on. This will transform your life. You've turned over the whole hierarchical scheme you were given to think with and come to learn from people you were taught to look down on racially, or maybe gender-wise, men learning from women. Rob, thank you for letting your head be blown off when you read my work given to you by the Michigan State person. Once you realize you're hurting and take your sources of information and caring further than you were taught to accept, it's transformative. It changes your life. And in the SEED project, where the majority of the leadership now is people of color, the main team is 5 people, of whom 4 are people of color. Teachers go away from their SEED leader training with a brand new look on who they are and how they got there and how to use their energy. It is so wonderful. My life improved immensely once I listened to my subconscious mind giving me 46 examples of unearned advantage I had as a white person born into a culture that favors whites.
Thank you so much. I got so caught up in both of your answers. I wanted to make sure that I was ready to ask the next question. Part of what I want to really sort of echo is some of the things we're hearing from people who want to make a difference, create change in their own circles. They want tools to be able to do that. They want to become, many want to become change agents in their workplaces, in the places where they socialize, and in their homes. In some of the different conversations we've had, many want to know, what can I do at home with my children? We would love to hear both of your thoughts on, how do we become advocates and change agents around this work? What are some of the strategies that people can use?
So I think it's Commissioner Ludgood's turn, right?
I was going to wait on you. All right, so I think one of the things you can do is to look at your sphere of influence and how to make an impact there. I don't, and I use that because I think if we had change agents all over the place who are working for change inside the place where they have the most influence, then we'll begin to see it. Because what that does is, instead of the person of color who's in that institution, or the known liberal, if you will, within in that institution, has other people making the case for why things need to be different. And I'm just absolutely convinced that the messenger is so important in a lot of these places. There are, you know, a person of color may make a point, a person who is not of color makes the same point. The person of color is unheard. The person who is not of color, then it becomes, you know, the greatest thing since sliced bread. So you have to be willing to do it right there. Drop down your bucket where you are, if you will, and begin to do the work there. But I would tell anybody who wants to be a change agent that you need to count the cost, because it may cost you your promotion. You may begin to be seen as a troublemaker, and you just got to decide what's really important to you. I think we probably can protect your job, you know, with the laws that are in place now, but there are very subtle ways to keep you down. So before you step out there and say, that's what I want to do, evaluate what it's going to cost and make sure you're willing to pay that cost, because there are costs. No one will tell you what they are. You'll just find out later that all of a sudden doors begin to close to you, access that you might have otherwise had before they realize what you really thought about the institution. Things may begin to change, but I will tell you that it's worth it. And at the end of the day, having made a difference, I think is going to be far more important than any of those achievements that you thought you wanted to have, but missed because you stood up and used your influence where you were.
And you can tell that to your grandchildren or your grandnieces or your adopted children or everybody who follows in your path, that you took the risk. And it didn't necessarily serve you well, but you've seen the change it made in the hearts of those who saw you or heard you or even acted on what you recommended. I'm so glad you're a county commissioner. You have the chance to take risks more than you ever did when you were a school child or when you were in your 20s. What I've done is to try to create more agents of change in the schools by, first of all, having the principal of a school support change by sending somebody to the National Seed Project for a week in the summer. We ask the principal of the school or the superintendent of schools to pay what it costs us to prepare a seed leader to lead a seminar in his or her school. That puts the authority system, that strategy, puts the authority system in charge. And we urge teachers, as soon as you get home from your week in the National Seed Project, go to that person who funded you and thank them and tell them what you did and how important it was. Then, since the aim of SEED, Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity, since the aim is to make the school a place where every child wants to be, where all children want to come to school because they are respected and encouraged and nobody looks down on them as though they can't do the work, we prepare teachers to lead a year-long seminar with 15 or 20 volunteer colleagues who have also had their doubts about how just a place school is, who are also unhappy watching the injustice certain children suffer from, any kind of bullying, any kind of teasing, any kind of excluding of children, any kind of mocking of children. 15 or 20 faculty can usually be found in any school who have feared speaking up, lest, as you mentioned, they lose their job, they lose their credibility. This 15 or 20, when they talk together, can change the whole tenor of a school. And we tell the principal, you need to allow time in assemblies where the seed folk can talk about their values and what they're discussing in the way of US history or local history or educational theory that is exclusive, that has kept people out. And I love our strategy. My aunt was a labor organizer in the FDR presidential era. And she said, the good thing about your strategy is it has a built-in multiplier effect, because those 15 to 20 teachers who come to the monthly seminar for SEED, they each see perhaps 100 children per year. And their values of including everybody and giving up on teaching techniques that were just for working for a few, they reach 15 or 20, reach maybe 1,500 students a year. And as a result, the SEED project has touched the lives of more than 9 million teachers in the United States. I'm sorry, 9 million children who have SEED-trained teachers that know how to pull them in, make them included, make them want to come to school. It transforms the life of the teacher, not to have bored students and not to be so bored at the kind of teaching they've been asked to do. They don't all have free rein. Education as a field is pretty rigid on coverage of material and grading and ranking and making assumptions. Education as a field is pretty hopeless as an academic field, in my view. But the teachers have the lifeblood in them that the children have. I had a 10-year-old grandchild. I said, I think it's ridiculous that schools of education allow you to get a big fancy piece of paper that says you're an expert in education before you ever read a single thing that children have said about their experience of school. And he said, that's pretty dumb. And I said, so could I interview you about your experience of school? He said, sure. And I said, okay, would you talk to me for a few minutes about your experience of school? He said, well, the food is no good. I like my friends. About teachers, I'm going to make you a diagram. They're the mean teachers. They're the nice teachers. They do a lot for kids, but they don't get us. And then there are and he searched for words for this third group of teachers. And finally said, well, they don't blame me. And he was the class clown. And I think that the teachers who didn't blame him shared his deep boredom with school. A year later, I said, Tobias, I've been telling teachers about your views on teachers. He said, what do they say? I said, they think you're brilliant to have identified the teachers who are nice, but don't get you. And he said, well, I have two categories now for mean teachers. There's a good teacher, but mean. And then there's a just mean teacher. They hate the kids, they hate the school, they hate the books. They should retire, he said. And then about the second group of teachers, he said, I've got two categories of nice teachers now. There are a lot of teachers that are nice and they do a lot for kids, but they don't get us. But I have found if you work with them, if you show them what's really happening in the class, they can improve. And there you go. the wisdom of the children and saying how education could be. That learning from such children is like learning from those you were taught to look down on. It is transformative for the teachers who can do it.
Thank you. That was wonderful. One of the things that we did when we made this film was we tried to come in with no preconceived notions, that we wanted to just interview people with general questions. And one of the questions was, what can we do to make things better? And the most consensus came around, people came to was around the idea of education and how we can change that by making educational opportunities more equitable throughout the community and not just in certain neighborhoods and things like that. But beyond that, the purpose of this film, the purpose of this current movement that's going on is about change. How can we fix this problem that we have? How can we move forward? And we've decided that one way is to have this series of discussions, and we've developed a conversation guide to help people have open, fruitful conversations. But then what? How do we get people to talk in constructive ways, and how do we get them to translate that into trying to make change where they are and beyond? I don't know whose turn it is, but
I just spoke at such length. I'd like to give over to the commissioner.
Okay.
So I think that's a complicated question. We have a lot
You're
of
two of the smartest people I know. I think if you can't answer it, what are we going to do?
we have a lot of well-meaning people who are well-intentioned, and they're looking for that little place where they can link on what we sometimes call the choir. But the one thing about I don't know that we really have a choir on this issue. We have some solos, some duets, some quartets, some ensembles, and all of that. And there's not really the choir, because for me, the beauty in choral music is when they sing together, each one, the sopranos are singing their part, the altos, the tenors, the bass, but it's the same songs, the same melody, the same lyrics. And so I think one of the things we got to figure out is how to actually get all those pieces of the choir, all those organizations and individuals that are out there doing their own thing on this issue, but it's not necessarily well coordinated. And so, and there are some complex reasons for why it isn't. There's some organizations that popped up because they weren't welcome in other organizations. There are leadership struggles. There are all kinds of complex reasons that we have not been able to really coalesce as well as we could around these issues. So I think that's the first thing, that the choir has to come to its table, and once there begin to articulate what its objectives are, and then who's going to do what. Because it doesn't make sense, for example, if we decide that voter education is a critical piece of this work, I don't know that we need 18 different voter education campaigns as opposed to one or two really good ones. And so I think that piece of it has to happen. And then within the conversation around, and these are people who agree with each other, they've got to have those difficult conversations, because there are reasons that they aren't all in the same organization now. So there's some internal work that needs to happen within those organizations. And I think leading that is once again the solution. We're all trying to get to the same destination. I've chosen one route. I went to freeway, you went to streets, you went all the way around into Mississippi and came back, but you still got there. We've got to talk about those kind of strategies, and then come away hopefully articulating some agreed upon strategies to achieve those objectives. I don't know how to do that, but I believe, just kind of my gut says that that's part of where we start. And then we're working smarter. During this COVID-19, I'm part of the Unified Command here in Mobile County, and I learned a new term. It's called battle rhythm, where you have to find the pace that works for what you're trying to achieve. And so in some places, you need to just be big guns, throwing everything at it, all your troops, all your equipment, all your weapons. And then in other places, you need to be more deliberate and more strategic. And I think we've got to look at our battle rhythm, because certain kinds of engagement is not sustainable because it's going to burn out. And this is a marathon. And so what we've got to learn how to do is to take the long view and not the short view. There are people in the choir who have a shorter view, people who have a longer view. We got to find the battle rhythm that works for all of us. I'm mixing metaphors now, but that's kind of how I see that. It's not an answer, Rob. I think it's an approach. I don't know that I have an answer, but I may have an approach.
That was a very good approach, very good start. I wish I could say things like that so well. Peggy?
I think that's a great metaphor from a seasoned battler. Seasons, and you've seen the campaigns in that battle that worked and didn't work. I would like all the agencies in Mobile to consider monthly meetings for a whole year, in which for the first few minutes of the meeting, everybody testifies to where they are racially right now. If they're saying, I don't have a race, I'm white, well, then they need a little remedial work. But be that as it may, the testimony of yourself as an ethnic person at the beginning of a meeting can clear the air. You can keep it personal. You can say, do not bring your opinions in, please. What has been your racial experience since we last met? And if they do that for 9 months in a row, they become more aware of how doors open for them or not, or fears developed in them or not. And the key thing is listen. To create the choral group, listening to the other voices is essential. The choir needs to listen. Then after that, okay, for the remaining 45 minutes of this meeting, what about my institution, my agency, my realm of responsibility? How have been the race relations in that for the last month since we last met? You are not advertising your agency. You are not running interference for your agency. You are trying to analyze it. At the end of month-long meetings that last for 9 months, my experience have been, first of all, people find they want to come to the meeting, though they were afraid at the beginning. And they have little to lose because they're not reporting to each other. Their salaries, their jobs, their promotions are not depending on each other. They're in separate agencies, or I'm not sure what the right word is for your larger community, but I have great faith in this very human way of talking about what's hard. And they could talk about money if they would like to talk about money, not race. They could talk about their gender identity. They could talk about their sexual orientation. They could talk about themselves within patriarchy. themselves as a family person. They could testify from any number of points of view about how their month has gone. They could talk about being a woman in whatever circumstances they find themselves. Sometimes in such a talking circle, folks share a poem. They might quote Rob. I was innocent, but I was born into blood I am still washing from my hands. This makes for good feeling. It has very little official sound, this kind of meeting. It is a group, an effort to heal what one of the people in your film called the collective brokenness. I recommend that. To partake, people have to forget what their formal authority is and bow down and be humble in the face of the collective humanity of everybody in the room.
You know, I really like that formulation, testifying. I call it stories because it just appears in this work that if you don't make room for people to tell that story, you aren't going to get anything else done because they want to be heard. They want somebody to know this is what happened to me, and for it to be affirmed so that they can go on from that. So I like testify. I'm going to start using that. I like that.
And children need that to be able to say who they are without judgment, without being corrected in a circle, in a classroom, so that the facilitating teacher needs to make all a situation in which every child is allowed to feel equally real to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to sort of have your perspective on this idea of connection. And there are many people who want to be able to connect with others who are different from themselves. So we have sort of the question around, like, sort of how do we do that initially? How does that happen? We have a Facebook question that someone wants to have lunch with a colleague, a Black colleague. But the other thing that we'd like to really think about is language. What are some of the things that are effective and productive in the way that we are using language in the conversation? And what are some conversation stoppers as well that we need to avoid when we are engaging with others who are not like us and really having difficult discussions around race? I would love to hear. Merceria, would you talk with us first, and then Peggy will give us her thoughts.
So I think the name calling, the name calling is a conversation stopper. And I have been guilty of that in my lifetime. Fortunately, I evolved to a place where I realized it wasn't useful, and that some people who might have otherwise been my allies couldn't hear me because the name that I had called them was just ringing, was so deafening, they couldn't get to anything else I was trying to say. I think the quenching stories, when people begin to testify and someone challenges the authenticity of what they're saying, or they begin to defend it, or whatever is going on, anything that impairs one's ability to get that story out that they need to get out, I think that stops it. I think ageism can stop a conversation. When I was 23, I thought that I had the corner knowledge. I knew it all. I'd already figured it out, and I didn't want to hear what anybody older had to say. And I think sometimes now, as an older person, we look back and forget our 23-year-old selves when we see it again. So I think what we got to do is make sure that we make room for all voices, that those young voices bring a generational perspective that I simply don't have. I have the perspective of the generation within which I lived. So we can't look down on people because they're senior or because they're young, because they both bring their experience to this conversation. And closed minds, if I'm talking to you and I realize that basically you've already decided the lay of the land, you really aren't here and you don't want to hear it, all you want to do is sit there and explain to me why I'm wrong about whatever it is that I think, then I'm going to stop talking to you because I feel like it's a waste of my time. So I think those are some things that really will stop a conversation. But at the same time, I think that that we got to get to a point where we can say things as simple as Black person, white person, and people not feel a need to whisper because they're using that kind of designation. People are uncomfortable with saying that. Well, is that, can I really say that? That's a language thing. I think we've got to find language where we can, as a nation, embrace and affirm that what slavery did to this country and the kind of society that it created. We want to backpedal from slavery. Slavery, it is what it is, what it was. And we're still feeling its effects now. And we just got to own that. We can't back off of it. If as soon as the word slavery comes up, you're ready to exit the conversation. That's not helpful. And I think we got to find the people have got to be willing to say and acknowledge that we had a constitution, elected and appointed officials, courts, and all of that were complicit in maintaining the vestiges of slavery. And we still see that now. What they did, it's embodied in our state constitution. It was ignored in our federal constitution, and courts upheld it. And we've evolved, but we've got to acknowledge that that happened. We aren't making it up when we say that that happened. And then I think finally, we got to find some language that says there was an economic consequence of those things that happen for who has and who has not. And so maybe with that, we can stop blaming people for their low wealth always and say that their low wealth is a result of their lack of initiative, or that there were other institutional factors. And that's got to be a part of the language. That's got to be a part of the conversation. Otherwise, you never will get to solutions.
No. So I wish that millions and millions would hear what you've just said. I had the opportunity to be on the English radio station, radio and TV, the BBC, the other day. And some white caller tried to deflect, no, the talk show host for the BBC tried to deflect the subject of race into being about the subject of class. He said, isn't this really, all these divides in the world, aren't they about class? I said, my grandparents owned slaves. They only owned 2 slaves, but a slave is a slave. And the sin of one person owning another is more serious than the sin of making money any other way. The way I got to do more is I decided, okay, I mustn't rest on the white privilege analysis with 46 examples. I need to write an analysis of the way in which the law and the courts and the Constitution and the police favor my racial group. And that we can't get anywhere on this whole topic unless we talk about the upside, which is being given the benefit of the doubt, having the doors open for you. And for me, then I wrote White Privilege, Color, and Crime, which is an essay in the book that Rob mentioned. And its news is even worse than the news in the first list, because the law can do so much to damage you, hold you back, destroy you. And what I found when I was writing the first list is that the police came into it just a little bit, but not much. One of my original 46 examples was, if a traffic cop pulls me over or the IRS audits our tax returns, I can be sure that they haven't done this because of the color of my skin. I had to go deep to be of use. At this point, I had to go deeper into the study of privilege and look at my own privileges under much more of, well, maybe a wider looking glass that went into not only the Constitution, but the history of colonization all over the world, in which whites were taught it was a good thing, a fair thing, a good thing to take darker skinned people's land and power and labor under the delusion that we were doing something that was good for them. So widening out, I would say to people who want to know, what shall I do? I'd say, look at what you've done that was constructive, or what in your personality is constructive. Do more of that. So are you an art teacher? Have there been children from Asia or Latin America, the Caribbean, from the Black communities? Have there been children who began to draw or paint or consider in their artwork who they are racially? Encourage that. Maybe have a special session on skin tones in which all the children are exposed to the wide range of skin tones in their own classroom. And the challenge of finding the right paints to paint all those skin tones, and then show your work for the school, so that you as an art teacher are carrying further what you might have started with by writing the Crayola company and saying, hey, the flesh tone crayon doesn't cover all the children in the class. This would take it further, make their creativity about who they are greater. I want all the children to really like their skin tone, though I have to say, quoting the English economist Barbara Ward, I am, in as far as the question of was she white or was she Black, she said she was neither, and then she said, I am in fact a kind of pinky gray. And I can't say I love the skin color, but I sure as hell know it opens doors for me.
Thank you. Wonderful responses. I'm having a hard time formulating how I'm going to ask my next question because I'm so caught up in what you guys are saying. But I want to go back to the BBC caller, and one of the questions that we were talking about asking today was, and you know, there are debates going on in our political discourse now about who's a racist and who's not a racist, and where does your political position, is it racist or not, and all of these kinds of things. And you know, Peggy's famous piece, she starts out talking about how she was studying male privilege. She was working in the Centers for Women, and and she started seeing her own privilege and where that led to. And so we have a tendency in this country, and I guess most countries, to sort of try to reduce things to a simple binary and this is the thing. But we have a lot of, it's more complicated than that, because we have these intersections of different issues, gender and sexuality and race and class and political party and everything else. How do we proceed in this work with all of those other things going on? Do we try to incorporate them into a unified message, or do we try to filter them out? How do we deal with that when clearly when we get people in a room that are different and they start talking about things, they're going to pull it in different directions? And how do we decide what the focus is?
I just finished speaking, and so though I'm happy to answer, I would like Commissioner Ludgood, sorry, got my spelling wrong, but I would like to give you, Ludgood, the floor, and I'll answer later.
So Rob, when you talk about what is the this, can you say more about that?
Well, I mean, this conversation is about race. What's in the news right now for the last few weeks has been a lot about race. But I think it's more complicated than that, that we also have issues of gender disparities. We have a lot of things about sexual preference and sexual identity, and we have issues of class and many other things. And a lot of the race issue some of it is class issue. Some of it is like we were talking about earlier about the politics, and you said you don't really buy into the right and left thing, and I don't necessarily either, but there is a lot of people who maybe for lack of a better term, to get back to the issue of whiteness, that a lot of the political opinions that I see on Facebook these days are people who don't recognize their racial identity. They think of themselves as the default or as the norm, and they think that it's something else. So how do we have all of these different complex issues. How do we sort through that and make it into a unified solution? Or when we're doing our work in some direction, how do we choose that direction amid all of the potential distractions and other just complications?
So, as we, I think as we doing the work, the focus is the work. And what I think the work is removing barriers, level the playing field, equal treatment, all of those things. That's the work. And as I do my work, I generally don't sit and say, okay, I'm working on the issue of making sure that there are recreational facilities throughout the county, no matter where you live and no matter what your economic circumstance. So I am a Black woman doing that, but it's not necessarily an item that's a Black agenda. It is from my belief that all children need a safe place to play. They need a safe place in their neighborhoods, just like their communities that can build parks and equip them, communities that have resources. The communities that don't have resources ought to have the same thing. And so I guess because as I do the work, for me, what guides me is the need. What is it that we need to be trying to fix? and not the labels. So that, you know, anyone who stands before whatever situation can expect equal treatment. I'm not sure if we are marching forward with all of our labels as the banner behind which we are working. I'm not sure how we get there, but if the work is removing oppression, removing injustice, eliminating poverty in whatever form it finds itself, wherever it is, then I know how to do that without the big banner. I don't have to be labeled. When you look at me, you know who I am, and you may assume some of my issues, but you won't know all of them just by looking at me, because I'm larger than my race. I'm larger than my gender, just in terms of what I care about and what I can work, what I want to work toward. I'm larger than any of that. And I think most of us are. And I think that the biggies, the injustice and oppression and the economic oppression, whatever kind of oppression it might be, I think those are our markers, the things that around which all of us can coalesce, and not the banners, if that makes sense.
In your film, this is a related comment. I'm remembering the clergy in your film who talked about our humanity as larger than the issues, or the issues all being subsumed within an aim of getting our humanity less broken. What I believe is that everybody that I know or have ever listened to in the United States has a combination of unearned advantage and unearned disadvantage, that nobody's living a life that is only a bed of roses. And if everybody has, on these different scores, in these different areas of life, a combination of unearned advantage and unearned disadvantage, then if they testify to that in company of each other, this deepens understanding and activism. That is, those who've had the most entitlement, the most privilege, start taking more serious interest in what's been difficult for other people in the group. And when you do these serial testimonies, as I call them, everybody has a minute to speak and nobody may interrupt and nobody may piggyback on what anybody else has said. Then you get a lot of raw human experience into the room. It humanizes the group to care about these overarching aims, such as removing barriers, increasing justice. Here are some of the variables that I work on. When people get into a circle and talk about their unearned advantage or disadvantage, you could have either on any one of these variables. You could be on the upside of avoiding the problem, or the downside in not having decent treatment. Okay, some of them are your parents' relation to education, the religion you were born into, your gender identity, your sense of whether you're in the right body that they assigned you at birth, your sexual orientation, your social class, what you've been permitted to join or not join, how your manners have been seen by the other people in the world. Your physical ability could give you advantage or disadvantage. Your parents' nation of origin, your parents' language of origin, your parents' formal education, your parents' income, your parents' relation to the dominant language and to the United States as a nation. Now, any of those and many more, your body type, your hair type, your way of handling yourself from toddlership onward, all of these can work against you or for you. And once you have a group of people who understand, it's not a matter of the rich versus the poor, whites versus blacks, but we've all got our sorrows. We've all got our dreadful training in school about avoiding the sorrows. Then you can work together. Then you can work together. I say it with such conviction because I've seen it again and again. It changes when people get to tell a bit of their story about advantage and disadvantage and know that they're not going to be judged as whining or boasting. Why then we become more human to each other. I recommend this in all companies. Once I gave somebody a list of white privilege in a company that I was invited to, and she glanced at it, a white woman, and gave it back to me. Said, "What else do you have?" Now she's big in the news for trying to compensate for the way whiteness has taken over the company. So I'm feeling very happy about that. It's a dismal time in history. This is a horrible year, but in ways, if it inspired you, Rob, to revisit the film, to make, as I hope, all of Mobile to see the film, then it's a reckoning time. It's a reckoning time.
We're so thankful that both of you really helped us really address intersectionality, because that is part of one of the really important components of this conversation, and it is one of the challenges that comes up as we're moving through the work. We have one last question from our chat that really kind of helps us think about systemic inequality and outcomes that we see in our community, and also really thinking about how we deal with confirmed racist in the work. So part of what we're doing in this work is identifying systemic inequality in our communities. And how do we continue to do that, as well as be able to effectively, civilly deal with, work with, try to communicate to confirmed racists if they are part of those systemic outcomes and disparities?
Well, I'll go back to my earlier comment about closed minds. Those are not people that I am going to spend my time proselytizing. I mean, they believe what they believe, and that's where they are. If they're in a position to impact, to keep a community or a class of people from achieving what they need to, then the courts are there to deal with them. But just on a social level where I'm just hoping that one day I will change them, I don't have any energy for that. I can do the work for the people who are open. I don't have any energy for the people who are where they are happy where they are, confirmed that they are better, that they're supreme, and they can just go on. I think those people are in the minority, and I think that there are enough of us who believe differently to be able to just neutralize them and still get done what we need to get done. I'm not mad at them, but I'm not spending any time on it.
I was asked on some talk show, what do you do with people who completely disagree with what you do? And I said, I avoid them. But I think that one of the things the film stressed, which is now stronger because of the film and the work by many journalists and teachers, community leaders, seeing the problem systemically and structurally rather than simply as matters of individual behavior or attitude. That's been very, very useful, and we need much more of it. In the town of Wellesley, the students of the college found that some merchants in the village of Wellesley were pretty mean to them, but others treated them well. So I did a structural thing. I said, well, how about you're establishing awards in the town, giving awards to people whom you, as Wellesley College students, feel have been unusually welcoming, have been notably fair to you, who have never allowed you to be followed in a store because you might be suspected of stealing. How about you students of color give prizes and awards? Or how about both the white and the Black students at Wellesley and the many, many Chinese Americans, Latinos, Puerto Ricans, and indigenous students? How about you band together as a group and say, we would like to bestow this honor on the merchants we think are friendly to all Wellesley students. And thank you very much. And here's your placard. And this is a way of using positive emotion and allyship for the merchant groups in Wellesley. It was good for the hearts of the women who did that. It was good for the hearts of the merchants to be awarded trust and confidence and appreciation. So I'd like to end my part of this, but both by saying thank you, Rob, for greatly increasing the ways of thinking about the structural nature of racism, but also thank you, Wellesley students, and both African American and all the others, for making the community feel somewhat healed by contrast with the rest of the United States. And that was 20 years ago, and I have never heard of a Wellesley student being followed in a store in Wellesley, Massachusetts, right near the college, being followed because she's suspected of being a shoplifter because of the color of her skin or the look of her features.
Those what seem like small steps can make big impacts. I think that's very important. I was gonna ask for closing statements, but you sound like you just sort of made yours. What if we were a little bit over time, but I'm not leaving for anything. So why don't we just get a short statement from each of you, and then we'll wrap it up, and then Joelle will tell us about next week.
So
Merceria?
sometimes I have to do that self-exploration that Dr. McIntosh was talking about, and why you continue to do this. And I am at the most fundamental level a person of faith, and I often search scripture for explanations for what I do or must do, and understand when I must persevere when I might otherwise not want to. And there's a scripture that I love. It's Micah 6:8, and I'm saying this because this whole conversation and the work around this, for me, it's a moral imperative. And it says, and what does God require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and walk humbly before your God? And I think if we could lockstep around doing justly and love and mercy and doing it humbly, then I think that that is a really good launching pad for all of this work that we so desperately need to continue to do in our communities.
Thank you.
I also am inclined to do a benediction on the work, and what I've already said, that when people know they're hurting, then if they repair some of the wounds that they have been taught to accept in others or inflict on others, there is a reward, an expansion of the heart. I think it is a spiritual expansion. When I started by quoting Audre Lorde on fear, but now I want to think about the shift from, for example, thinking that the police impose law and order, to seeing that inside of me, trained into me, was a policing mechanism that was about law and order. And what I read as law and order was that people of my kind, my looks, were in charge, and the streets were silent. And that was my view of law and order. And what that did to my inner self was create a police state, which I couldn't break any rules, and mustn't talk to people unlike my kind, mustn't kiss my grandmother's cook, black cook, goodbye. That internalized system of law and order in me damaged my ability to have good relations with the world and with the people of the world. It was like a false system of law and order that interrupted, no, created bad race relations in my very soul. In my very soul. Creating better race relations out there, creating better race relations in my heart was a spiritual gift, or opened spiritual doors to greater humanity.
On behalf of Mobile and Black and White, we just like to thank you both, County Commissioner Merceria Ludgood, Peggy McIntosh. We're just so honored that you would spend time with us today and share your expertise, your knowledge, your experiences with us as we continue to do the work. And so we're just so appreciative of you. We have notes in the chat that are just saying thank you just for, just being with us today. And so we just appreciate you very, very much. To everyone who's watching, we're looking forward to continuing the series. Next week, we will make sure that we have our new panelists, Anthony Outlier, Terry Kelleher, and Jim Flowers. And we are excited to have them, as well as we'll be making sure that you have access to segment 2 immediately following this session. And also we will make sure, if you want to register and receive the guidebook to accompany the conversations, please check our Facebook page. You are able to register as an individual and as a group. And we are just excited that you're joining us. We're looking forward to continuing to move from dialogue to action. Thank you very much.
I must say something here. Co-presenting with your extraordinary commissioner was a great favor to me. And I'm at a distance, but she's on the ground there. The technology of today has allowed us to be more or less in the same space. She has a harder row to hoe than I do. And she's a magnificent person and resource to the community. And I want to thank her for being on the program and co-speaking.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you both. This has been a wonderful hour and now 20 minutes. And so thank you so much. And we hope to see a lot of you that are watching next week. And great.